the museum now, and I can hear the guard coming after me. This museum does a kind of opposite thing. It takes us away from this aesthetic, this pure aesthetic beauty, art, nature as sort of beautiful, calming, step away from everything else nature. Now, I'm not saying that all, obviously, environmental art does this, but this particular tree museum is more like, if you remember Robert Smithson's non-sites. He'd take dirt from Passaic, where he grew up in New Jersey, and he'd bring it into a museum, and he'd say, this is a non-site. And the exclamation point of that non-site is what this tree museum is so amazingly about. And I could go on and on about the history of the concourse, and you learn through all these tiny micro-histories from people. You hear stories that you would never hear. And I could go on and on. I'm trying not to go on about this, about how the city itself, I mean, it's great to hear about the plan for New York and for the future, but you don't really hear about Lehman Brothers collapsing when you're at the Tree Museum. You're listening to everybody's voices, and you don't hear about. You hear about people coming into the neighborhood and when white flight began and kind of filling in, with any kind of business. It didn't matter that it was X business or Y business or Z business, but people came in and made a new thing and made a new place. And a side exhibit that we're also not going to in the Bronx Museum shows all these pictures of hip-hop artists starting in the 80s in the Bronx. It shows when the Democratic National Convention was held downtown in Madison Square Garden. It shows a field of rubble. It looks like a farm field in North Dakota, except that there's a few crumbling buildings left where artists wrote "Last Hope" and other intense phrases stenciled onto the buildings, as there was an alternative convention to the Democratic Convention downtown. These are the things you hear about the Tree Museum, and what's amazing about that, when you're seeing these photos of that convention in 1980, you look at the faces on these people, and they don't look like, they look more like the faces at Democratic and Republican conventions, happily, that happened the last election term. They do not look like, the faces don't look anything like what was going on at Madison Square Garden in 1980. But these are the things you hear at the Tree Museum, which we're leaving, and that's what you see. This is what you learn about the Bronx. And before I read this last piece, I want to read somebody's tree on the Tree Museum. Before I do that, I'll just say that I was watching a documentary about the destruction of the soul of New York, I guess is one of the quotes in the piece in the documentary, and it talks about how neighborhood development happens, and I live in the Fulton Street area, for instance, and people are talking about how we have to change this. Fulton Street needs to be developed, but there's a place like Fordham Road where there's so much economic activity and so many people are pleased to be there and find it to be such a sort of concourse of human activity and greatness that this one woman talked in this documentary about how the city presents a plan and we end up having to fight it. Now, that may not happen all the time, but we being the city, sometimes you figure out, I think, when you go to the Tree Museum, has to do a better job at looking at these little tiny roots and branches and micro waterways and things that you can't see unless you go to, and it's tough, you can't do it. It's hard to go to the Tree Museum. It took me a long time to see all the trees. I wouldn't recommend it if you don't have like 2 weeks off from work, but this is kind of what you get, and so here we are at this last tree. It's the last tree I'll mention, and it's run by, it's spoken for by Majora Carter, who some of you may know, who I think ran Sustainable South Bronx for a while, and she talks for number 6, a honey locust, and then you can just leave. You don't even have to say goodbye in my museum. You can just go. But she says, growing up in the South Bronx in the 70s and 80s, there weren't many trees around for me to appreciate. I don't even have any memories of trees here. And how great that the Tree Museum talks to people who aren't talking about the trees. Okay, sorry. I'll let her talk. Maybe they were burned along with the buildings that landlords torch in order to collect insurance money. And then she continues, kind of relating trees to investments and roofs to infrastructure in a way. And she says, the absence of trees and green spaces, along with little to no investments in education and law enforcement, created the conditions where people felt powerless and unwanted. Many noxious industrial practices like power generation, waste handling, and trucking moved in without effective opposition. Public health suffered. I don't believe you have to leave your neighborhood to live in a better one. And trees are an important part of making that happen. I hope you enjoy this tree, and I hope you can promote the value of paying people good wages to take care of all the trees in our urban forests so they can provide the environment and social services that we all need to live better, more cost-efficient lives, good lives. And so that's my tour of the Tree Museum. I apologize for going so long. I can't help it. I just can't help it. Thanks for listening. And I'll talk to you later. We have, let's say, time for maybe one comment or question for Rob, and then we'll head back. Would anyone like to make a statement or a question or comment on the Tree Museum? We all want to head back. Okay, it looks like everyone wants to head back, so let's do that. Oh no, get the head right here. Well, oh, the Tree Museum, I'm happy to announce, has been extended. It was supposed to close, I think, last month. It's going into January. Somehow she got money to keep the phone system alive. But people are calling it from all over the country now. And people in the neighborhood are saying, oh, call up so-and-so, and then you can leave messages and create a kind of sub-tree gallery.